Alright, so this is our first video of the year. We are looking at points, lines, and planes. So what we want to do before we get into the actual problems is look at the vocab. So for most of these things, these are the most basic shapes that we're going to use this year. A lot of them we won't have technical definitions for. So instead what we're going to do is just sort of use little pictures to just sort of illustrate what these things are, because there's not really a ton we can do to like define them other than describing them. So for a point, right? Everybody should know what a point is. Point, the most basic figure, literally just a dot, right? So for a point, it's one specific spot on the plane or the map or whatever it is that we're drawing, right? Okay, so we also know from last year lines, right? They can go in whatever direction we want. They're perfectly straight. Key though for a line is that it continues forever in both directions, right? So that's why we put the little arrows. A ray is very similar to a line, only it only goes in one direction. So we notice that instead of having arrows on both sides, we have a dot. So for a segment, you'll also see this called a line segment. So the big difference between a segment, a line, and a ray, right? We notice the segment actually has dots on both sides. It has points. That means it has a specific starting and ending point. Therefore, it's going to have, a specific length, and we'll be able to work with segments a lot more than we normally work with, lines and rays. All right, so angles. All right, so when we draw an angle, it's going to look something like this. So we should have seen angles before. We have different types of angles, but basically the angle represents sort of the space that's in between the two rays, right? Whenever we talk about rotation, things of that nature, we're talking about angles. And so again, we'll get more into that as we move along. But for right now, that's an angle. All right, so a plane, right? So when we talk about a plane, this is going to be the most basic sort of three-dimensional shape, right? So a plane, I'm going to treat this guy, just think of it like a flat surface, right? So the top of your desk is a plane. A sheet of paper is a plane. Planes go off in all directions, just like lines, but they're 3D instead of 2D. All right, so I know there's a lot of terms, but we're almost done. So the next two we can actually make definitions for. So collinear, right? When we say things are collinear, what we mean is that they are all in the same line, right? So notice the word line is in the middle of it, right? So if we're trying to remember what collinear means, look for the word line. So if I have, say, multiple points, if they're all in the same line, right, that means they are collinear. Similarly, coplanar, we almost see the word plane in there. They just had to leave the E off, right? So if collinear means they're on the same line, I'm doing dotted lines here. Coplanar means they're on the same plane, right? So imagine this little highlighted portion is my plane. So if I take some points, put them in here, those points are coplanar. All right, and then the last term, intersection. Just think of intersection like you're driving in the street, right? When the two roads cross, that's an intersection. So basically an intersection is anything where two shapes cross. So for example, we have two lines here. That point in the middle is where the two lines intersect. Alright, so now let's look at some examples. How are we going to use these in problems? Alright, so we notice we have a figure. We've got a plane. We've got a couple of lines, and we have a bunch of points. So when they label this stuff, right, we notice there's a little P in the corner. That tells you that the plane is called plane P. So when we want to state what plane we're talking about, we use the P. The dots, the points, right, the letters next to the points, those are the names of the points. Notice we have this lowercase r next to the edge of that line. So that r is referring to the line. I can also name the line by just picking a couple of points that the line crosses through. Again, we have to do it in this way so people are sure which line we're talking about, because there's a bunch of lines on this paper. So, example 1a, they want us to list a line that contains point W. So I can't just say line W, but what I can do is say WX. And then I'm going to put a little line above it with the arrows to let whoever's reading this know that I want the line to go all the way, right? It's a line that's got to pass through point W, it's got to pass through point X, and it goes with arrows on both directions. I could use any 2 points that are on that line, right? So you can either call it WX, call it WY, you could call it VW, whatever you want to do. You just got to pick out 2. Alright, so point X, right? Point X is here. We notice it's in the middle of that big blue plane. Before we said the P in the bottom corner names the plane. So all we got to do is call it plane P. Again, this is all just going to help us practice naming things. It's important to name things because we have to be able to explain clearly what it is we're talking about. Alright, so the next 2 problems you can try on your own. Let's move on to the next example. Alright, so we look at this. We have our picture. The example says, name some geometric figures presented in the picture. So if I look at it, that little sheet of paper has some lines going around it, right? They highlighted some stuff for us. They labeled some points for us. So we have point G. It looks like we have some lines on here, right? So we can call the line, say, from F to J. And again, we want to make sure to put the arrows on the end because it has arrows in the picture. And then the sheet of paper itself is a plane. And since we don't have a specific plane number, or letter, sorry, like we had in the last picture, what we want to do is use 3 points to list the plane. Right, so the plane, it has points F, it has J, and then it has G. I could have also used H. It doesn't really matter. As long as I pick 3 points that are in the plane, everything should be good. Alright, so again, a couple of examples for you to work. Let's look at this one, example 3, together. So a lot of times we're going to be given sentences that describe something, and we're going to have to draw the picture out. So here it says, draw a picture that models the description given below. So I need to have a line L and a line M, and it's got to pass through point P. So let me zoom in a little bit to give us a little bit more space. Oops. All right. So we need 2 lines. And they have to cross at point P. So I know, again, my lines have to have the arrows. The point, it told me to call P. And then if I want to name the line with just one letter, I'm going to write the letter on the edge of the line. Alright, so notice this time, we need a line, we need a plane, we need a point. So planes are the hardest to draw, so I'm going to draw that one first. Again, I like to highlight in the middle so it kind of looks a little bit more 3D. Again, on your paper, you're not necessarily going to have to do this because it's going to look weird. Then it said we need a line. And so notice what we want to do is kind of make this look 3D. Alright, so we notice the point is already technically highlighted, right? The line is drawn for us. We need to call the line QR, right? And it also says that it intersects the plane at point L. So we're going to put an L here because that's where it crosses the plane. We're going to need to add a couple of extra points so that everything's labeled. And then we're going to need to put a little N in the corner of the plane, because if you remember from before, that's how we labeled the plane with a single letter. So now we have a plane N, we have a point L, and then we have the line that passes through points Q and R. Everything is where it needs to be. There we go. So that's all there is to it. Example 3. Alright, so then example number 1 I will leave for you to do. We've got one more example to work together. So this time it's basically asking us to identify different parts of the picture. So the first thing it wants to know, how many planes do we see? So we definitely have the plane that looks like all the other planes we've been dealing with. But we have a bunch of other planes that make up the figure, that big shape that's in the middle there, right? That's a pyramid. We're going to go more into pyramids later in the year. But for right now, we just need to know that all these little figures are planes. They all count. So when we're counting up our planes, we need to include those as well. Alright, so how many is that? So we have one that looks like all the rest, and then we have 5 more that look like triangles. So altogether, we have 6 planes. Alright, so once again, 6 planes. So it's collinear, right? Remember we said collinear means they're on the same line. So all we got to do is find 3 points that are on the same line. We look at it. There's a line right there. It's got 3 points. Again, points are listed only as one letter. So that's letter J, or point J, point K, and point D. And that is that. So hopefully you can try to work the next few on your own, and I will see you in class.